I am very pleased to introduce our next three speakers. We have moved kind of intellectually on our conference itinerary now from traditional seminaries, which are working in one form or another with distance and hybrid education, to diocesan schools that have either partnered with seminaries or partnered together in order to create the strongest possible local formation program, seminary-like but non-accredited, that they can. And now we have moved to the diocesan school, which I imagine almost every diocese in the Episcopal Church has in one form or another. I should say I somewhat mistitled this portion of the intellectual itinerary. I titled it Beyond Ordained Leadership, Dimensions of the Diocesan School Model. But I shouldn't have, which I do mean to highlight. I think we'll be talking about lay leadership and catechesis for all the baptized. But I shouldn't have stepped past the training of deacons, which is so often a central part of what the diocesan school does. Someone raised that in conversation, and I realized that I had left it off. But I shouldn't have, because I didn't intend it substantively. Our first speaker is, of course, one of the conference organizers. Dr. Douglas Dupree, the Reverend Dr. Douglas Dupree, is canon theologian here in the Diocese of Florida and the rector for the Bishop's Institute for Ministry and Leadership, which the slide tells me you're just about to learn more about, so I won't say too much about it. Previously, he served for many years as chaplain and dean at Balliol College, Oxford. I believe you were there for 32 years, I think I saw in your bio, from where, perhaps not Balliol, but anyway from Oxford, from where he also received his DPhil in theology. His research interests include 19th century English church history, contemporary East European and Russian churches, and I also noticed that you gave a class on C.S. Lewis and Joy Davidman. So I'm very grateful for all of the hard work that you have done in helping us pull all of this together, Douglas. Our next two speakers after that are Bishop Michael Smith and then Bishop Carol Gallagher. Bishop Michael Smith is the 11th Bishop of North Dakota, where he served since 2004. Previously, he served congregations in Minnesota and Oklahoma, I believe, including on Native American reservations. As I understand it, he and Bishop Carroll are the only Native American members of the House of Bishops. I think that's right. Both of them have, Michael serves in the Diocese of North Dakota, and then Carol has served in a number of dioceses with a lot of small and scattered congregations, most of which can't afford a full-time priest. I happen to be a native North Dakotan, so Bishop Michael Smith was my ordaining bishop. He didn't have a place for me, but he sent me out to the wider church. That has been noted, so I'm grateful for that. And I can certainly testify that that is the reality of the world in which I grew up, small scattered congregations in small towns, and also of the people that are served by the bishop's native collaborative, which both bishops are heavily involved with. This, as I understand it, was established by the bishops of Alaska, North and South Dakota, and Navajo land to train native clergy to serve native congregations. That brings me to Bishop Carol Gallagher, who has served as, Bishop Michael Smith is now also the proud possessor, or maybe a humble possessor, I should say, of a D.Min from the Aquinas Institute, in which he studied how to train and form preachers to serve native congregations. Now, that brings me to Bishop Carol Gallagher, who has served as Bishop Missioner for the Bishop's Native Collaborative, designing for them a culturally appropriate curriculum. She got her MDiv from EDS and an MA from Princeton Seminary, and she also her PhD from the University of Delaware in leadership, urban affairs, and public policy, in which she particularly focused on training native leadership to serve in the Episcopal Church. She's the author of two books, one on family theology and the other on congregational development. She's currently bishop for Native American Ministries and the assistant bishop in Montana. Previously, she was assistant bishop in Newark and the suffragan bishop in South Virginia, and also an assisting bishop in North Dakota. I think that means have Crozier will travel. In addition, she has served in congregations as rector and interim quite recently, as I understand, in Sitka, Alaska, and elsewhere. What I think this adds up to is that Bishop Carroll has a wide experience of ministry needs in a number of regions in our church and people groups in our church, especially rural and Native American. I'm very pleased to introduce all of these speakers. Looking forward to what they have to say. And Douglas, you're up first. Thank you.
I'd like to see that, but I don't know. I guess I'll be okay. I retired from my job of some 30 years in Oxford in October 2014, and I knew I wanted to come home. I have a little house in North Florida, and I knew I wanted to come home and live in North Florida in retirement. I knew also I wanted to keep my hand in the ministry. I don't think you ever retire as a priest. I don't want to retire as a priest. I want to continue in the ministry. But I didn't know what form it would take, keeping involved in the ministry, but I certainly didn't think it would be full-time. And somewhere before Christmas 2014, I had a phone call from Bishop John Howard. And he said, "How are you doing?" I said, "I'm fine. I'm trying to settle into the retirement thing." And he said, "Don't do that." He said, "I'll explain, but come have lunch with me." And so I went to his office and had a typical Bishop John Howard. There's a sandwich chain called Jimmy John's, and we had a Jimmy John's sandwich lunch. And he pulled a small piece of paper out of his wallet, and he unfolded it. It was well worn. And he said, "I've been carrying this around for a good number of years." And I knew this about his ministry. I knew that when he came to Florida 14 years ago, 13, 14, he walked into quite a turbulent situation. It was a period of time when churches and people were divided in the Episcopal Church, and in North Florida in particular, 13 congregations, a large number of congregations decided to separate from the Episcopal Church, and a lot of the clergy as well. And so a large part of his episcopate in the first years was just really stabilizing the Diocese of Florida and holding the ship together. And through God's good providence, he came through that. The Diocese of Florida came through it intact, still part of the Episcopal Church. That gave him a chance to breathe. And the diocese, I think, gave him a sabbatical leave. And on sabbatical leave, he had an opportunity to regroup and reflect and think about something positive for the future of the Diocese of Florida. I'm telling your biography the way I understand it. At any rate, on sabbatical, I think, he jotted down some things that he thought he would love to see happen in the Diocese of Florida. And on that little piece of paper he took out of his wallet, he had written, in essence, "I want a school. I want education to be at the forefront of ministry and life, quality education at the forefront of life and ministry here in North Florida, in the Diocese of Florida." And he said, "I'm finally in a position where I can begin to help us realize that dream." What gave him the green light to invite me to the Jimmy John's lunch was after all the turbulence, he restored something called the foundation board of the diocese, which was a body of people who were charged with raising money in order to fund future projects, things that you dream about but think we'll never have. The foundation board in the Diocese of Florida was able to, through hard work and dedication, to raise enough money that some really marvelous ministry could begin. For instance, urban ministries. I don't know how much we had in North Florida before the foundation board agreed to fund urban ministries, and we've got marvelous urban ministry in Sue Carmichael is a veteran of this good work in Jacksonville and in our other principal city in Tallahassee. And included in that was a green light for his vision of an institute, a school, for the continuing education of the clergy and for developing lay leadership. I was excited by it, and I readily just said, yeah, sign me up. I can't wait to start work. But he gave me a blank slate. And he introduced me to the Diocesan Convention in January of 2015. He said, we can't put you on the payroll till June 1st, 2015. And so I started to work June 2015. And I thought the other thing he said, you can do all kind of different hybrid models for learning, but the key word, the mantra, is incarnational. I want education to be local. Father, you said earlier, no, you didn't. Where's Kemper? Bishop Kemper School. There you are, sir. You said earlier that all formation is local, but the bishop really wanted us to have something that would make a difference in North Florida, to really make education shine. So I would say, we're probably out of the embryonic stage, but we're still growing. We're a fairly new thing. But in the very first stage, the first few months, I thought, I just have to get our name in the street. And so people would know we were very much in business. So the first thing we did, I thought, I've got to have a quality event for the laity and a quality event for the clergy. For the laity, we invited a very distinguished Presbyterian author, preacher, and speaker, Earl Page, who came to Camp Weed. Well, that's another piece of it. Earl Palmer. The bishop said, he was also trying to really revitalize Camp Weed, and under the mantra of not only a camp, but a campus, to make this a center for learning and for things like what we're doing, the discussion we're having this weekend. So, two things at Camp Weed. One for the laity, we had the distinguished Presbyterian Earl Palmer. Click the slide and see what we see. Who came and talked to us a weekend with C.S. Lewis. Do it again. Please. There you go. We sent flyers out, and that was our first kind of big event, a weekend with C.S. Lewis, really a weekend with Earl Palmer. And we had a gathering of some 150, mostly all laity, for that inaugural weekend. And that may not sound like, great big thing, but in a way, if you think of a diocese that had been divided, would this be too far from the truth? For the diocese to come together and just enjoy something together, like a weekend with C.S. Lewis. That was kind of a big moment, both for education and just the brotherhood and fellowship in the diocese. And then the next thing we did, you don't have to switch the slide. Well, you can. So the flyers, we couldn't get tired of Earl Palmer. We brought him back the next year for Bonhoeffer, and then the next year for St. John's Gospel, each time attracting large numbers of people. For the clergy, I immediately, within 2 months of having inaugurated the Bishop's Institute, we invited Mother Julia Gata from Siwani. She came and she's a marvelous retreat leader, and she came and led a retreat for the clergy. And I don't know where I'm going. Let's see. Anyway, and then we went from just having show events to get our name in the street. The second stage for the Bishop's Institute, and I did all that research. Someone said earlier, wouldn't it be lovely if we had a really fine list of all the different educational institutes in dioceses across the country? I did my own version of that. I wanted to see what everyone else was doing. And I soon discovered, the two models. Some diocesan schools simply limited themselves to speaker events, getting illustrious teachers and speakers to come and, talk to a group of lay people or clergy. And others, more along the superb Iona model or Bishop Kemper model, actually offered a proper school for long-distance learning. And so the next stage was, I'll tell you where I'm going with this. The ultimate stage is to have a school within the boundaries and means of our diocese for clergy continuing education and for licensed lay leadership. But as an intermediate stage, in 2016 and in large part of 2017, we did workshops in different key areas of ministry, both for laity and clergy. And I thought, well, now, what are the key areas? How do I find that? This is a far, far world from Oxford University. So I thought, where will I find, what are the things that, a really switched-on layperson who is showing leadership qualities, what are the areas that we need to concentrate on? And I just came up with a very simple idea. I thought, when you hire a new rector, what do you want that man or woman to do for the parish? What are the responsibilities of a good rector? And I was able to identify, I guess, 8 key areas. And I thought, well, if you want that for the clergy, wouldn't it be nice to have that for the laity as well? And so our key workshops have ranged from everything from leading worship to assisting in leading worship to stewardship, hospitality. You would know the list. And we have done a whole range of workshops over the last 2 years. We had a very fine one in January last year with the bishop leading an instructed Eucharist and the North Carolina broadcaster and deacon David Crabtree, who came, and they did an instructed Eucharist, and we had a large crowd of 100 and plus for that. And this March, they're going to team up again, and they're going to do a workshop on how to use the Book of Common Prayer. We can't take that for granted any longer, because in a lot of our parishes, people don't open the prayer book. They have a printed, do you have this in your parishes? They just have a printed bulletin that has the whole service laid out for them. Anyway, but the third stage I'm most excited about, and that is to move toward more of a school model, like Bishop Kemper or Iona. And I should say this before I go any further. We are open-hearted and open-minded to collaboration, and as we gather strength, we keep open as we grow the possibility of wanting to take advantage of resources like Iona or Bishop Kemper, or indeed the many fine seminary programs that we've heard about today. But at any rate, the next stage, very much, I'm no good at PowerPoint, so I'm kind of abandoning that, and I'm just trying to remember what I want to say. The next stage for the Bishop's Institute in the Diocese of Florida is a school for licensed lay ministry, the canon law allows for licensed lay ministries in some, I think it's 7 areas or 8 areas. And we already, I should have said this, we've already inaugurated a very fine course, as many dioceses have these for training vocational deacons. We graduated our first group of deacons in 2016. That's a 14-month course. And so when I went to work on the idea of licensed lay ministry, to have qualified licensed lay ministers, I already had that model for deacons to work with as a kind of template. But I didn't work alone on it. I've worked with a consultancy group called Neighbor Faith Consultancy, and they have helped us very much with coming up with a proper, we now have the course. We've got the course in hand. Probably won't start until the fall. We have also, as a template, a very fine program, an initiative that was taken in one area of the Diocese of Florida, Putnam County. In Putnam County, a group of priests took an initiative, and they realized that there was a need for licensed lay ministry, for lay people to lead worship and to be catechists and do things like that. So they're already in the field training vital lay people for very key responsible ministry. And I thought I would give part of my presentation over to Bishop Howard to tell you about the Putnam County Initiative, and then to tell you a little bit more about it briefly, Mother Diane Reeves, who is the chief tutor for that program. So may I do that at this time?
Thank you, Douglas. Of course, hosting this event is part of the work of the Bishops' Institute, and I'm appreciative of Douglas's leadership on that, and certainly to Christopher Wells and Jordan Hilden and all the other wonderful folks who've been involved with this from the Living Church. So thank you very much. We have one objective in this diocese, and that objective is to evangelize and to grow the church. And everything we're doing has to do with evangelism and church growth. The Bishops' Institute is part of our strategy for that. This place is part of our strategy for that. And our great hope is that by evangelizing and bringing more and more people into a real and living relationship with God in Jesus Christ, that the Episcopal Church might actually keep a few of them. And if we do that, we will have succeeded. We're fortunate enough to be one of the short list of dioceses in the country that has grown over the last few years, but that after some terrible setbacks when we sailed into some really stiff wind around here about a dozen years ago. So Putnam County is one of the poorest regions, not just in the state of Florida, but in the country. It sort of stretches down the St. Johns River, south of Jacksonville and out to the west of St. Augustine. And along the river down there, there are a half a dozen, maybe 8 small parishes: Palatka, Crescent City, Federal Point, which is right on the river, which I think really was a federal point back during the late unpleasantness of the 1860s. And a little town called Wielaka, Emmanuel Church in Wielaka being the gem of the river region of the state. I knew nothing at all about what some of these folks, Diane Reeves and her comrades, were cooking up until one day they came to my office and said, "Sit down." I sat, and they said, "We're getting ready to," well, no, we're not getting ready to, we're already in the process of training lay people to take over our jobs. And I said, well, praise the Lord, tell me more about it. And they did. What they have cooked up is a way for some of these small, scattered, very poor congregations to be able to afford ministry. And that is to go back to some of the original New Testament models of letting lay people do things that lay people can do, and reserving for the clergy only those things that they need to be there to do. They are in the course now, with my blessing, enthusiastically, and the blessing now of the lay leadership of the diocese as well, training people in areas of lay leadership with regard to worship, preaching, evangelism, catechism, handling transportation and administration of communion, and doing virtually everything else in the church that a layperson can be licensed to do. And I've told them along the way. They asked me early on, and I tell them we'll push the boundaries on all these things as far as we legally can, without getting either you, me, or our closest loved ones into trouble. So good things are happening. I already provisionally licensed some worship leaders, some Eucharistic visitors. Diane, who else has been provisionally licensed?
I had 4 preachers.
Okay, preachers. So they're provisionally licensed because they're still in training, but the necessity was so great that we've moved ahead on that to provisionally license them. We'll have more in each of those categories and the others that I mentioned as time goes along. And in some of these congregations, it will be an absolute necessity that they operate really as spokes coming off from the hubs of 1 or 2 larger churches that will have priests. And some of those priests will be locally trained. The one now in Palatka, the largest church there at St. Mark's Church in Palatka, is seminary trained and has a graduate degree as well from Sewanee. But several of the other priests in that region are locally ordained, and now we'll be working even closer and closer with lay people who will be doing much of the work of the church. It is, to my way of thinking, exciting, healthy, forward-thinking, the sort of grassroots initiative that rose up without the bishop even knowing about it, which delighted me. It warmed my heart, and I'm praying that it will continue. Diane Reeves is the rector of St. Andrew's Church in Interlaken, Florida. It's an amazing ministry, a large ministry that touches thousands of people every month, with ministry fairs, open tables for community groups that come in to assist people in their lives there. Food, clothing, legal advice from the appropriate folks, big buses that pull in for health care checkups with the local residents, and absolutely packed worship services on Sunday, led by this fine woman who is one of the great priests of our diocese, and I think of the entire Episcopal Church. She deserves much of the credit for envisioning this lay ministry initiative that we're calling the Putnam County Initiative, and I'm glad you'll get a chance to meet and hear from Diane today as well. When the time comes for questions, I'll be glad to answer any you may have, but please know the deep appreciation I have to each of you for being here, and for those who are presenting at this program, Douglas, to you for your vision and hard work. And I will surrender the floor.
If you'll call Diane to the floor.
Diane, come to the floor.
Yes, sir. So I'm Diane Reeves, and I have a hard time talking in front of people, but I will try to do my best. I'm handing out a brief example of what we've been doing. We started this, I want to say about 3 years ago. Rick Westbury, who was the the priest at Christ Church, Ponte Vedra, originally from Putnam County. Met with several of us a few times to talk about this because, as Bishop Howard just told you, West Putnam County strives to be the bottom of the pile, and we usually make it. We're the poorest county in Florida. In Putnam County, especially West Putnam County where I am, there's no industry, there's nothing. There's nothing in Putnam County. And so it's hard to pay priests. So I became what was then called a Canon 9 priest 18 years ago. I'll try in a minute. I'm still in awe when I put my collar on. I was teaching and minding my own business, and the next thing I knew I was a priest. But then we met with Father Bob Marsh, and bless his heart, he made a notebook of things that we could use in our curriculum. And so I started meeting with my folks about 2 years ago. We've been meeting for 2 years, every Thursday night. And everything you see in front of you, and actually everything you see in this little booklet that Wiley just passed out, my guys have done. They're all lay Eucharistic ministers for visitation. They are very strong in the Cursillo movement, so they know how to present themselves, they know how to give talks. In fact, 4 of my guys, I have 6 worship leaders, and 4 of them are constantly on Cursillo teams. So what we did, we started about 2 years ago. We meet every Thursday night, and then eventually what I had them do was practice. I would sit in the congregation and I would watch them do the service. Then I would go over and consecrate the elements. But I had them practice preaching. I had them practice being up in front of the congregation until I was certain that they were comfortable with what they were doing. Meanwhile, we were doing all of the study. They could probably be ordained in another year. And then, so we wondered how we could go about it, and this is what Bishop Howard instructed us to do. If I'm not there on Sunday morning, I've been there 18 years, and I probably can count on one hand how many Sundays I've taken off. So to be able to maybe take off on Sunday was awesome. And I'm not getting any younger. Bishop Howard has very kindly said that he will not hold me to an age, which I'm getting now, wish he would. But as he said, I don't want to leave, because, not yet, because we have this amazing outreach. We went from a congregation that was very, very small and very, very hateful. And I was called to go to St. Andrews when I gave my life to Christ. I told him all the things that I would do. A priest at St. Andrews was not on my list. God has a good sense of humor. But our Lord, in His infinite wisdom, took some people home, and that helped the congregation. So we've gone from a congregation that had an invisible fence that no one could come in the church, to this amazing outreach that Bishop Howard just told you about, in a congregation that's so loving, and indeed our congregation has grown. So what we do on a Sunday morning, if I'm not there, 2 of the, I call them kids, anybody under 60 is a kid. 2 of the kids go to St. Mark's in Palatka with our elements and have them consecrated. And hopefully in June, over there we have Deacon J. Jameson, who will be a local priest in Hawthorne. We'll be able to start using him in June because it's closer. They go get the elements consecrated. They bring them back to St. Andrews and do the whole service except the consecration prayer, because they already have the consecrated elements. The kids got up in front of the congregation one day and explained what was happening and wanted to know if there were any concerns or if this was going to be a problem. And overwhelmingly, my congregation enveloped them, and they were all for this, because these kids are just so so devoted to Christ, so devoted to our outreach, so devoted to the congregation, that it's worked out very well. 4 of my guys were licensed as preachers, and the same thing. I had them practice. I sat in the congregation. They practiced. They do an awesome job. Sometimes they sound like a mini-me, but that's okay, as long as they're telling the good news, you know. But they're developing their own style, which is really, really amazing that they're doing that. So it's really working out really well. My only concern right now, Father Bob Marsh is at Blackham, that's where we go, and I'm at Hawthorne. We're getting a little bit long in the tooth, so eventually, we'll retire. My concern is we're going to have local priests in that area, because the worship leaders have to go somewhere. None of these congregations have the money to pay for even a part-time priest. So this talk about local priests is awesome, because we're going to have to develop something, because we'll have to either have a couple of local priests at different churches, or maybe circulating, maybe my church one Sunday, and consecrate elements, or the kids are going to have somewhere to go in these different churches, to be able to bring the elements back. But it's working amazingly well at St. Andrews. In fact, at Holy Communion Hawthorne, Jay and Father Les were not able to be there one Sunday, so 2 of my guys went over there and did the service at a different church. So, because I don't know about in your congregations, but my guys don't like to do morning prayer every Sunday, or even one Sunday. They like communion. So this is the way that we can have communion in a continuous service every Sunday. Are there any questions? Is that what we're doing?
Can we hold the questions?
Okay. Oh, you want to hold the question?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Thank you very much. I think I've run out of time, but I'm happy I've run out of time, because I wanted you to hear Mother Diane, who's such a marvelous priest in our diocese. Just one last comment, if I may. Someone earlier, I think it was in the presentation with Bishop Kemper and Iona, mentioned the need for training preachers. And one thing we've done under the Bishops' Institute, and will continue to do, is we have a diocesan college for preachers. And we ran our first college for preachers last year in 2017. We had a dozen of our priests who were willing to give the better part of a week to come here to Camp Weed. We had outstanding mentors, senior priests, good preachers who were the teachers for that course. And the chaplain of that College for Preachers, Joe Gibbs, who is one of our rectors, it was really his sort of inspiration. He's here with us today. But that's it, basically. I didn't follow a script, but we're having fun in North Florida, and we're all enjoying educating. When I worked in Oxford, the average age person I worked with was between 18 and 30. In the 30 years since I left the Episcopal Church, I came back. You have to learn something new if you've been away that long. It's gotten older. My average age I'm working with now is probably 50 to 90, but I'm learning a lot from them as well. Thank you very much.
Welcome Bishop Smith and Bishop Gallagher. This session lasts until 3:15, so you have
over the time for questions. Thank you. Up until this point, this conference had been very organized and orderly and dignified. That's getting ready to change.
Right now.
Carol and I have been friends and colleagues since God was a child. Seems like it now, since the 90s. I am happy to be enrolled an enrolled tribal member of the Potawatomi Nation in Oklahoma. Carol is enrolled in the Cherokee Nation, and we have been involved in Native American ministry in the Episcopal Church since the 90s. Carol is a Cherokee, and if you remember your American history, there were 5 tribes that were known as the civilized tribes: the Choctaw, Cherokee, Chickasaw Creek, and Seminoles from here in Florida, and they were known as the 5 civilized tribes. So Carol likes to remind me that I'm not part of the civilized tribes, and I like to remind her that the Cherokees will let anybody in their group. So we've been involved in Native ministry that whole time, and someone earlier asked, does one size fit all? And we have to say resoundingly, there ain't no way. It doesn't, because we find ourselves having to adapt, having to be flexible, having to find out what the needs are in a particular community. Bishop Sumner last night brought up the Venerable Roland Allen, and one of his teachings was, and I think you mentioned it, that all the spirits, every church has all the gifts of the Spirit. Now, I think that's true, but I've come to believe that not every congregation has all the gifts of the Spirit. And so I believe that every diocese, every local church has all the gifts of the Spirit. But that has changed the way that we function when we talk about total ministry or the ministry of the baptized and preparing people for leadership. In 2012, we gathered at a conference on theological education in Native ministries in Oklahoma City, and there are 4 dioceses, the bishops of which oversee significant Native work in this church, and those are the dioceses of North Dakota, South Dakota, Alaska, and the Navajo Land Area Mission. And we were kind of all doing our own thing in terms of schools for ministry, and we decided, maybe we could collaborate more. So the Bishop's Native Collaborative came out of that gathering. Now, since that time, just last year, we've grown from 4 dioceses to 11 of us, and Fond du Lac, Iowa, Montana, Minnesota, Central Gulf Coast, Wyoming, and Hawaii have joined what we do. A large part of what we do is assessing in a particular congregation with the bishop what we can help them do. We draw from a lot of programs. We use some of the Iona materials, and I think people in Iona should know that there is a teaching on Holy Eucharist Rite 1 that has been used and received in an Eskimo village on the Arctic coast. We enjoyed it. And now I will take with me material from the Episcopal Diocese of Florida. So we we find what's out there and see how we can apply it in a particular place. I think Jordan said this was for ordained ministry. We tend to think of it as leadership because it's lay ministry as well. Because one thing that is unique about us is that our culture does not self-promote. And first of all, no one is going to come up and say, I feel called to be a priest. It is starting way back there, and recruiting is even a bit aggressive for us. Mm-hmm. I would say we have to engage in a ministry of encouragement. For example, I've been involved in the formation of preachers for these congregations. And if you go up to a Native person and ask, how about you becoming a licensed preacher? They would say, there's no way. I could never stand up and give a sermon. And then you say, well, could you read the gospel and share what you hear Jesus saying? Oh, I could do that. Well, could you do it on Sunday after the deacon reads the gospel? So, those are the kinds of things. So that's where we have to start with those kind of ministries. I lived those four dioceses that I mentioned, we're talking about 150 congregations scattered all around. The vast majority of these congregations are in rural, isolated kinds of areas. The other part of this, other than Navajo land, which is a particular people, the other groups involved, we can't be exclusive just with Native ministry. So, all of our congregations are part of this, even though we call it the Bishop's Native Collaborative. I had the good fortune of living on the White Earth Reservation for 10 years in Minnesota. And people would ask what it's like, and I would say, do you remember the show Northern Exposure? That's what life was like. Tragic and delightful. You never knew if you were going to meet someone who had not finished high school or who had their PhD from Harvard. You just never knew. There were surprises everywhere. So you can't assume anything in these settings. But there are some things that are unique, and the poverty in these areas, the financial poverty, let me say it that way, because there are great riches and treasures, and you will meet some of the finest people you've ever met in your life in these places. But there are social problems stemming from that poverty. And these are some statistics from the U.S. Census Bureau. 27% of American Indians and Alaska Natives have income below the poverty level. 27%, that's compared with 14% of the total U.S. population. And when you compare that with other racial and language groups, by race, the highest poverty rates are American Indians and Alaska Natives at 27%. Blacks or African Americans are 25.8%, Hispanics 23%, and whites 11%. I mean, you just get a sense of the disparity. Not only are Native Americans the poorest racial group in the United States, in South Dakota, the American Indian poverty rate is 48.3%. Followed by North Dakota at 41.6%. And 7 other states have Native American poverty rates of about 30% or more. Arizona, Maine, Minnesota, Montana, Nebraska, New Mexico, and Utah. There was a survey of the Episcopal Church done years ago in '87, and it lists that 29 dioceses of the Episcopal Church participate in some sort of specialized Native American ministry. And most of these congregations are in the reservation settings of South Dakota, North Dakota, Alaska, Arizona, New Mexico, Minnesota, and Utah, where the financial poverty, historical trauma, and accompanying social problems of chemical dependence, suicide, and physical and sexual abuse make for challenging missional opportunities. They're the kind of places that we believe Jesus would be. And so when we talk about what's best, seminary education or local formation, our answer is whatever works, whatever we need to do to raise up the church in a particular place. And most importantly, another Roland Allen principle, the leadership needs to be indigenous. There is no one who can preach to Navajo people better than a Navajo leader. And that is what is sorely missing in our church right now. We have lots of well-intentioned Anglo clerics preaching to Native people. And so it's crucial that we raise up the local leaders to do that kind of work. In this part of the country, it is a tribute to historically to General Seminary, where James Lloyd Breck and came out west. You know, you've heard the old saying about with westward expansion that the Methodists came out on horseback, and the Baptists came in a stagecoach, and the Episcopalians waited for the Pullman cars to come out. That's not true in this one. It's one of those places we got here first. And so to this day, it makes a difference. When you go to the Dakotas or Minnesota and you go off the reservation, most of the Germans and Norwegians descendants who are there are either Roman Catholic or Lutheran. If you go on our reservations, they're either Roman Catholic or Episcopalian. Now, how many places in the country can you say that? And so on our churches, the Episcopal Church is very important in the life of indigenous communities. And again, they're some of the poorest communities in the country. We're going to play tag team. And
There we go. All right. That's a lot of statistics. I'm sorry for all that. You know, he can't help himself. He's just a poor, pitiful pot of water me. But one of the things I need to share with you is some of the things we've been trying to do, and we've been doing this we're on to 6 years now or so, and we named it the Bishops Native Collaborative, not because we were excluding anybody else as much as it was bishops who ordain people and have to make the decisions and also have to invite us into their diocese. I mean, so it was important to have the invitation of other bishops to say, you know, we need your help or whatever. We didn't want to force a program on anybody, but help people to find out what they need. We came up with a very academic, I wouldn't say academic, but extensive training program to get people ordained. And we got our feet on the ground, and we realized that people didn't know some real basic things. And we also realized that people had been taught, whether well or not, by some priests to wait for them to do things. One of the other things culturally in our communities, as Bishop Mike was saying, we don't self-identify. That's just not who we are. And so people will wait until the elders have decided that, you know, they somebody should step forward. But one of the challenges of that is some of our elders are really a problem in that they make it harder for folks to step forward because they don't have the tools to encourage the basic skills of those people. So when we were doing some assessments, we realized there were some basic tools that people needed before we started identifying who might step forward for ordained leadership. So I have done a lot of teaching people how to be lay leaders in the church. And we just got our website public. What's today, Friday? Wednesday. I've been working with the new Navajo website builders, the Chaz company that is part of the Episcopal Church in Navajo land, so that they are a institution that is beginning to provide some income for some young people who are developing web-based programs and all those kinds of things. So we got our website up and running. There are still some glitches in it, but bishopsnativecollaborative.com. You can look up. What we did was we put together a notebook and sat with one of our deacons from Alaska and said, okay, what do people need? Now, not everything is organized or perfect, but we put in everything people would need to be able, if they're on their own, to be able to lead worship and give them that kind of encouragement. So when did I come out? I've been helping Bishop Mike with the, and the BNC has been providing some resources for the Deacons Training Program in North Dakota. And we were working on lay leadership training. And so I taught folks how to make bookmarks for their prayer books. Now, this was an inexpensive, basic skill, okay? You find this foam you can buy, all the tools you can get at Walmart, you know, that really are really high-priced, expensive curriculum development place. foam that has already, sheets of foam that already have a glue on it, and cut ribbons, and you fold it over, and it goes in the back of the prayer book like this. Boom. And we make prayer book markers with ribbons. Now, why is that important? If your first language is Navajo, this book is a pain in the butt. Excuse my French. But it's confusing. There are so many options. So if your first language is English, there are an awful lot of people who have no idea how to navigate. Most of your folks in the parish are not sure. You know, it opens up to 355 in a lot of places, right? So you could drop most of the prayer books in this church and they'd open to 355. But the understanding of what else is in there and how you get around it and all those kinds of things is not, and I hold us clergy and bishops responsible for not being teachers and teaching people how to use the tools we've given them, okay? So we teach people how to work with the tools they have right there. One of the most fascinating things when I was in North Dakota doing this little craft, and it wasn't, I've worked with all sorts of different age levels of people doing this, but a part of my work has been, I did some study with some anthropologists, and one of the things I paid attention to when we were in North Dakota was we had a group, and it's a mixed group. There are many Native people and many non-Native people in this group, and so you get 5 or 6 rolls of ribbon that people are cutting to certain lengths, and you have this foam that it's, a lot of it I already pre-cut, but some folks are cutting it. But among the non-Native people, predominantly white folks, one person would take it and pass it to the next person, cut their supplies, and then pass it to the next person. And on the other side, the Native folks, somebody had taken a pencil, shoved it down the center of the ribbons, and one person was pulling it out and somebody else was cutting it. And those are the cultural differences that we don't pay attention to. And some of the things that our struggles in the things that we do is the challenge of helping people who are going to teach among us how to understand cultural differences and how folks work together. We do everything in, community. People, all the classes that I have taught and all the things that Bishop Michael has done and other folks we've had, it's always intergenerational. People have to bring their kids. Folks have to bring the grandma sometimes. Sometimes they're the only people who have a car. And so if anybody's going to get into town, we do that. We had a group of about 25 or more training to do licensed lay ministry in the Diocese of Alaska in September. And we had to figure out how to give them the ability to, when there wasn't going to be a priest for a long period of time, and we're talking about remote villages. How many people here have been up to the Arctic coast? One hand back there? Where did you go? Huh? Okay. In Canada, right? Others?
Yeah, right up to Cisco along the coast.
Along the coast. It's really a long way from anywhere, okay? When you go on a little plane up to one of the Arctic villages, right on the coast, generally we stayed in an oil camp, anybody who's visiting in this little village we were in, and you fly in a plane that is, pretty bare bones, loud, and you get to be met, and they pick you up. Usually somebody has a pickup truck and it'll pick you up. And when I was traveling up there, these women were coming back from Fairbanks, and they had gotten pizza because they really wanted pizza and hadn't had pizza in a long time. That's just basic life. That's how you do it. And women would come in and wearing their big parkas, and the woman would sit down and undo her belt and out would pop a kid. Because when it's 40 below, the kid is inside the coat. Okay? There's no strollers, the kid's inside the coat. And that's just who we are and how we have to deal with both the issues of financial poverty, but also the questions of the extremes that we have to deal with. And so when we were talking last night about sacrifice, I got to tell you, the people that we work with sacrifice more than most of us would ever understand. They sacrifice so much that we do have some folks in seminary, but all of them are away from family, the couple of people that are in seminary. Several of them are already ordained and are getting, who were able to come up with a way for them to be trained. But their sacrifice is incredible. And those people who are trained locally are giving up time away from jobs. Most of them are primary income and a meager income, but they're more than willing to do it. And just want to share with you one story for when I was a suffragette in Southern Virginia. I worked with some of the folks, the tribes in Virginia, and as some of you might know, the tribes in Virginia, the ones that welcomed our church, you know, those lovely folks who made room for those first folks who were visiting from England and setting up Jamestown. We call her Pocahontas, but they call her Matoka. Those people, what they call, sometimes referred to as the Powhatan Confederacy, and those 6 tribes in that area of Virginia did not have federal recognition. And they didn't have federal recognition because, you see, during some war between the colonies and the crown, they fought with the crown. They had all sorts of relationships with the crown, so they were their friends, you know. And so we as a federal government decided they didn't need any of those services or recognition. And in the 40s and 50s, you couldn't be classified as a Native American in the state of Virginia. You were either white, or you're colored, or you were mulatto. So basically, people were wiped off the face of the universe, okay? They just didn't exist anymore. So they have been fighting and lovingly working to have federal recognition. And so people, I was sitting in this very intense meeting, and there were people from the state who was saying, all you're there for is the reason why you want federal recognition is so you can have a casino. And that's what everybody thinks. We all have casinos, and we all make a whole lot of money, and we all, you know, drive big old trucks and stuff. And one of the chiefs, dear man, got up and said, you know, we promise we won't have casinos. And we can't have casinos. And some very smart lawyer from Alexandria, I think, looked at them and said, well, why is that? He said, because we're all Baptists. So even the people within just a few miles of many of our Native people have no idea what the community life is like and how complicated and difficult and different it is. So our goal is to work really hard to help people get the kind of encouragement and support they need, give them the underpinnings, and then help to raise up priests from those groups of people. And across the board, I would say we're serving somewhere to 60 plus people in a variety of different age groups and things like that. We would love to, you know, say we have 20 people that are ordained, but what's even more important is we're building and helping the really overextended bishops, including Bishop Michael and others, raise up their leadership and encourage them and give them the tools they need so they can go out and serve their people. Tag, you're it.
A number of our learnings are unique for us, but I know that when we talked, I heard someone talk about inner city Detroit and Appalachia. I know there are many things that are similar, but to be honest, a lot of what we're learning, I think, is applicable to many of our rural white congregations. The same kind of dynamics go on in small rural communities. I want to close with sharing my wish list about what I think would help us grow with this work, and not just us, but I think the wider church as well. I don't emphasize the priesthood any longer. It has its own mantle and its own baggage that goes with it. But I have become such a fan of deacons that I just can't tell you. First of all, in our communities and in the world at large, we have got to have people who have one foot in the church and one foot in the world, and who mobilize us who are in the church for service in the world. It's essential. The diaconate, is making a comeback, but it doesn't have the stereotypes or the baggage, I think, that priesthood has. So I really have emphasized the diaconate. Here's the tricky part. Once you're a deacon, you're just this far from being a priest if we need you. So, but using that, the emphasis is the diaconate, and but as you're forming those people, you have a chance to be ready for needs as they come up. Now, some people would not appreciate this, but in our settings, and I think in most rural settings, we cannot be purists, okay? And so, and I'll confess, some of you might go, oh, you can't believe I did this, but I did it to a deacon one time. She loved being a deacon. She had a deacon's heart. But they had no Eucharist. They had no one there. And I believe part of vocation and part of God's call is where there's a need. That's part of the call. Are you needed to do that? So I asked her, well, could you think of yourself as a deacon who can celebrate the Eucharist? And she said, I'll do that. So that was good enough. That's what we've done. Now, some people would say, that's not a deacon's ministry. You know what? It's the ministry of the church. And we all have different roles. And sometimes we have to step out of what we think is our role and do something else. We've got to be flexible with that. And so with that in mind, I would love if some of our institutions, some of our seminaries would offer a certificate of diaconal studies. And because I think that connection with the seminary is important. But then we have to do our hybrid, our distance learning. And in our setting, that means not individually on my laptop. That means we have to have an elder or a mentor at home who is forming that learning community. Because what happens, we're not good at getting the papers back in. But you can be in groups of learners who they're engaging the material. I even say, fill it out together. Just get the paper in, that kind of thing. So that would be very helpful to be able to have a connection with a seminary, but do our work at home. So a certificate of diaconal studies. I'm most familiar with the Neshota program. I'm sorry that the dean is not here today, but I am, and someone here had done the master's in ministry, right? And it was very similar to what Sewanee had done in terms of 8 courses with 1 week internship or intensive. One of our problems is that our people don't have bachelor's degrees. And so we're not eligible to go to seminary. So a dream that we have, but we have tribal colleges all over the place. So I would love it if we could pattern the master's level, those 8 courses, if someone could write them as a bachelor's level course. We have people locally who would be, qualified to lead those in a tribal college, and they could get bachelor's credit for the degrees they're working on as an elective in their programs, and we would be doing two things. We would be training our leaders locally and also getting them ready to go to seminary. Okay, that's my second wish. We're always going to need people who are seminary trained, but we've got to have our people who are seminary trained who can come back and be
Right.
and that is so the idea of the bachelor's level twofold, as I just said, train here but get ready to go to seminary at the same time, and then finally. You know how a lot of non-Episcopal seminaries have Episcopal or Anglican houses of study? I wish that one of our seminaries would have a Native American house of studies, so that, and it's not a matter of being exclusive, it's more about support and encouragement, because a lot of our formal education is so intimidating, not just to Native people, but to anybody out there. And so a lot of times people need help in being able to navigate through that and to have a mentor who is there. And I think we've got other models of educational groups within a larger group. And I think that would be a wonderful thing for us. Anything else? Thank you.
Yep. Thank you all.